curator of Native American art, Patricia Marroquin Norby, a co-organizer of the exhibition, Mary Sully, Native Modern. We're so grateful for this extraordinary turnout tonight. Really just wonderful to see so many of you here for this very special program, which explores resonances between our guest speaker, Dr. Temple Grandin's pioneering work on visual thinking and Mary Sully's intricately designed and vividly colored drawings. I'll give you one image to look at as we're speaking here. The program also marks the very bittersweet closing of the exhibition at 5 p.m. this Sunday. Something that's very hard for many of us in this room. It's been a wonderful, wonderful experience, this exhibition. But I should note that the galleries are open till 9 p.m. tonight, so if there is time after the program, you can certainly spend some time with the art then. Mary Sully Native Modern is, in effect, a reclamation project that centers the sui generis work of a largely unknown, reclusive artist of Yankton, Dakota, and settler ancestry. Mary Sully was born Susan Mabel Deloria in 1896 on the Standing Rock Reservation in South Dakota, and grew up in a distinguished family of Dakota leaders, including tribal spiritual figures and others active in the Sioux Episcopal Church. She lived in New York City at different times during the 1930s with her sister Ella Deloria, who I'm showing you here right on the rooftop of their Upper West Side building. Ella was a gifted linguistic ethnographer and a protege, along with Margaret Mead, Zora Neale Hurston, Ruth Benedict, working with the Columbia University-based anthropologist Franz Boas. So this exhibition in many ways tells a New York story as well, in addition, of course, to being the first solo exhibition of Sully's distinctive art anywhere. It is a particular pleasure and privilege to have members of the artist's family with us tonight, though I cannot see them. I know they're in the front row. As one of the most meaningful aspects of this project for Patricia and me has really been developing this partnership and friendship with them over the last couple of years. So I want to recognize Peggy Deloria and Lacey and Mike, and just thank you again for your great partnership. Our collaboration began with a focus on acquiring for the Met Sully's remarkable triptych drawings, you see here in the installation, that complicate notions of early 20th century modern and native art, a process we finalized in June 2023 with 19 works, and I want to thank our director, Max Holine, who's also here tonight, for supporting that acquisition. 15 of those drawings are on view in this exhibition, with 10 on loan from the Mary Sully Foundation, which was established by the artist's great-nephew, the noted Dakota historian at Harvard University, Philip J. Deloria. It was Dr. Deloria's 2019 publication on his great-aunt's life and art that inspired the Met acquisitions after reading the book, and his book remains the only scholarly examination of her, while also serving as a deeply personal and complex family narrative. One of the reasons we felt Sully's work belonged in the American wing had to do with her complicated family history. Her great-grandfather was the famous Euro-American antebellum portraitist Thomas Sully, known for his depictions of celebrities such as the young Queen Victoria in the American Wings collection, as well as, ironically, the so-called Indian killer president, Andrew Jackson, the image on the $20 bill. Thomas Sully's work is widely represented in the American wing, and I'm showing you here his self-portrait, along with the work featured in the Mary Sully exhibition, this delicate watercolor miniature of his son, Alfred Sully, when he was a cadet at West Point. And it was Alfred Sully who fathered a mixed-race daughter named Mary Sully, or Soldier Woman. When Susan Deloria decided to present herself as a visual artist in the 1920s, she very intentionally took the name of her mother, that is Mary Sully. And we do have a family tree at the entrance to the exhibition because this gets very complicated, but it's a fascinating one to observe. The largest portion of the exhibition, as is the case with Sully's artistic production, are her so-called personality prints, some 130 striking depictions of Euro-American figures from popular culture, politics, religion, which are decidedly not prints, but unique, hand-drawn, vibrantly colored abstract portraits arranged in this vertical triptych format. These works best exemplify Sully's distinctive graphic sensibility and sophisticated sense of design, not to mention embodying her keen wit and enthusiastic immersion in the life of her time, especially during her New York residencies. And these three works I'm showing you are on our New York wall. You have Gertrude Stein, and this marked the time when she was visiting New York in the 30s, Babe Ruth, and then in the center is Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia. It was my co-curator, Patricia Norby, who first evoked Temple Grandin's 2022 publication, Visual Thinking, The Hidden Gifts of People Who Think in Pictures, Patterns, and Abstractions, in relation to Mary Sully's creative and socially removed observations on American culture. And I really want to applaud Patricia for her determination in bringing to the Met Dr. Grandin, distinguished professor of animal science at Colorado State University, noted author, animal behaviorist, inventor, and autism self-advocate. These two scholars will come together on stage for an exchange after Dr. Grandin's presentation. I also just wanted to say we're very grateful to our education colleagues, especially Mariana Siciliano, managing museum educator in public programs and creative practice, for their role in realizing this program, underwritten by the Clara White Smith Weber Fund. And I want to recognize leading Met patrons and friends of the American Wing, Dee Dee and Barry Wigmore, whose foundation made possible the exhibition Mary Sully Native Modern, and Dee Dee and Barry are with us tonight, so thank you all so much. And now, without further ado, I am very honored to introduce you to our very special guest, Dr. Temple Grandin.
Great to be here tonight. Got lots of things to talk about. That's my book, Visual Thinking. Yeah, shameless bookseller, is for sale in the bookstore. Okay, well, that's my first slide right there. And what I want to talk about is how there's different kinds of thinking. We need the skills of people who think differently. I've spent a big part of my career working on designing livestock handling facilities, which uses my visual thinking skills. Now, the first step is you have to realize that people do think differently. There's the old thing, the artists and the accountants don't get along very well. Well, one of the reasons is they think different. Excuse me. First step is you have to learn different kinds of thinkers think differently. I was shocked when I found out in my early 30s other people didn't think the way I did. All right, how good are you at details? This is a sign at the Denver airport. Thousands of people walk by this sign and they don't see the boarding pass. Area 51, aliens on a key fob. Yeah, I laugh my head off when I see this sign. It's been there for years. Now, being a visual thinker helped me in my work with animals, because I thought about looking at what cattle were seeing. And if the cattle don't want to walk through the chute to get vaccinated, it's because they're seeing a reflection. Now, 2 hours later, that reflection may be gone. Yeah, people weren't seeing that. There's 3 different types of thinking. Now, the first type is the artist, the object visualizer. And artists are also very good with mechanical things. It's my understanding that Mary Sully was very good at fixing a truck and a car. And art and mechanics tend to go together. Animals, also highly skilled trades. We've got a real shortage of that. We need them. Now, I'm finding as I travel around broken elevators, broken escalators, to fix them. Now, the other thing is object visualizers, the real extreme ones like me, can't do algebra. I'm worried that we're getting screened out. Now, I love NASA. I just had to have an excuse to show the 1960s mission control, totally refurbished, historically accurate, and the elevator was broken at the Johnson Space Center. I had to walk up 5 flights of stairs. I love the historical details there. Big ashtrays full of butts. I thought that was really funny. Now, this is a flower a young man in a welding class made, an autistic young man. And he just saw boxes of parts and he made flowers out of them. Yep, this is art. But this is the welder I want to hire to maintain my factory, because they're going to see how to fix things. All right, here's the mathematical mind. You see, you have the object visualizer. Then you have the visual spatial mathematical thinking. Computer programming, chemistry, physics, music and math go together. Art and mechanics goes together. I'm also seeing a lot of problems today. We're not developing our math kids. We want to stay ahead of China. We better develop our math kids. No, that third grader might need to take high school math, or he's going to become a big fat behavior problem. Now here's the verbal thinker. Thinks just in words. And one of the problems you have with the verbal thinkers is that they overgeneralize. Now, I love this brand new article that just came out. Language is not required for thinking. You don't need to have language to think. I go, oh, that's wonderful. Now, some older studies also show very clearly that there's a difference between the object visualizer like me and the pattern thinker, math thinker, visual spatial. Now, I think Mary Sully's some of both. I'd love to have some mathematicians go over some of that art as she does the further abstractification of it. Okay, visual cortex stores. Does it store the visual information? No, it would be the card catalog or the Google. And then the visual thinking art's probably stored in the visual cortex. So I like visual analogies. So the visual cortex finds the memory, the back of the brain is where the memory is stored. I just had to take a picture of this old card catalog that this library just couldn't stand to throw out. So the card catalog, or Google, is how you find the book. The library is the visual cortex. Or, today, giant warehouses full of computers that eat astronomical amount of electricity. Okay, math kids, I got an assignment for you. Figure out how to make that data center run on half the power. Takes a visual thinker to give the math kids their assignments. Now, I think Mary Sully is very definitely a mixture of an object visualizer and a mathematical thinker. You see, especially that she's good at fixing cars. I haven't been able to get any information on her math abilities. I'd love to have mathematicians go over some of this art. Also, I get science and nature, and I can't believe the beautiful geometric patterns that are in the various chemicals and inside our cells. I've got a huge circuit here in my brain for visual thinking. We can go through that really quickly. Now let's look at how the art students, the science students, and the literature students go about inventing a planet, inventing a marvelous, fantastic planet. Visual thinkers, oh, one group made polar bears and palm trees, another group of students made the crystal planet. You know, just fantastic. But the science students, the more mathematical, they just drew a circle and boring information about atmosphere and gravity. Very little graphics. And then the humanities students just did splashes of colors. But you know what shocked me about the word thinkers? No planning. No planning. The artists and the mathematicians, they planned their projects. Because one of the problems you have with a lot of the verbal thinking on policy is lots of ideas, no way to implement it. Object visualizers, for example, can see a risk. Okay? Doing a talk, and they've got a laptop up here on the lectern, and we put a bottle of water next to a laptop. I don't think that's a very good idea. That's an example of seeing risks. So the mathematician might say, what's the probability that water's going to spill on that laptop? That's not something I'm going to test. And the verbal thinker doesn't even realize it. Also, I can see a solution to a problem. I'll tell you one thing. I saw they built some waterproof doors that are supposed to protect your subways. I'll tell you right now, the seals are not going to work. Instead of going high-tech, they should have just gone old-fashioned, big cranking wheel in the middle of it and crank the things shut. They don't need to be fancy. Okay, verbal thinkers tend to overgeneralize, but my kind of thinking is not very well organized. My thinking's associative. It's associative. And where verbal thinking is much more linear. But what I'm concerned about, verbal thinkers making policy, is there's not enough information on how are we actually going to do something, to fix something. Okay, we don't make it anymore. I do a lot of these talks to business people. I've taken a bunch of the engineering slides out. I'm not going to show you the beautiful hydraulic power pack made by a person who can't do algebra. We don't have time for that. I've got to get done in 20 minutes. That clock is counting down back there. We don't make the state-of-the-art electronic chip-making machine, even though it's based on mathematical research done in the US. Look at all the mechanical gadgets on it. But there's a lady that got an associate's degree, it's a 2-year degree, that now fixes these machines. She had to have a year of training over in Europe and other places. Yeah, visual thinkers are needed for this. And when you get into the meat industry, that equipment's all imported. Chicken equipment, pork equipment, we don't make it anymore. It's coming out of Holland. We've paid the price for taking out shop classes. And that's me screaming in the middle of the Steve Jobs Theater, screaming, we don't make it anymore. Structural glass walls from Italy and Germany. And the roof, carbon fiber, super light. One crane can pick up the whole roof. It's from Dubai. We've paid the price for taking out the art classes, music classes, and all the skilled trades, hands-on classes in the schools. Now this varies as I travel around the country, but I'm very concerned about this. We don't have people to fix things anymore. And I'm seeing more and more problems with broken elevators. That's another big concern as I travel around. Now a lot of schools have kept theater. And the part of theater I liked when I was in school was making scenery and costumes. I didn't really like the acting part, but I sure liked making sets. No, we need these classes. And I'm seeing too many of the visual thinking kids just going into special ed and getting labeled autistic because they can't do math. And then they turn into behavior problems. Now my grandfather was the co-inventor of the autopilot for airplanes. Academic, mathematically trained, but he worked with another person who was autistic. Come up with a crazy new idea for making an autopilot. And they tinkered in a garage, in a loft. But the stolen version was in every warplane during World War II. They needed a lawyer. This is where you really do need the different kinds of thinkers. I'm concerned that my kind of thinker still haven't passed an algebra class. We're getting screened out right now with all these math requirements. Yes, we need the mathematical minds. Let's go back to the food processing plant. I need the mathematician to build the refrigeration system. But all the mechanical devices, things that are mechanical, like packaging equipment, that's coming out of the people in the shop that are the visual thinkers. Okay, the object visualizer, somebody labeled drafting technician, lays the whole plan out. Then the visual spatial mathematicians, okay, we've got to make sure the roof doesn't collapse. We're going to need them all. You see, you need both kinds of minds. And on the book, yes, and by the way, it is for sale. And unfortunately, I cannot do a book signing. They have security requirements where I'm not allowed to come off the stage. I'm sorry about that. We'll just leave it at that. I did pre-sign a bunch of copies. They are in the bookstores. Wish I could sign books. Normally I just walk out there and go sign books in the lobby, but you know, it's a new era today, unfortunately. We'll leave it at that. But I wrote the first drafts, and they were disorganized, you know, associative thing. And Betsy Lerner, my co-author, she smoothed it out. So that's my kind of mind, and the verbal thinking, working together in collaboration, I think is a really, really important concept. Okay, let's look at building buildings. Architects make them look nice. That's the art side of it. Engineers make sure they don't fall down. Also, you gotta make sure the mechanical systems work. I was looking at that big skinny tower as we came in here, and I said I wouldn't want to be in that building during power failure. That would not be fun. Okay, 20% of the people I worked with when I was out designing equipment were either autistic, dyslexic, or ADHD. And you have a lot of mathematicians, a lot of mathematically inclined people that I know are undiagnosed autistic. And these people had multiple patents. These were the visual thinkers, designing and building complicated equipment. I spent 25 years out in heavy construction, and these people were not just building equipment, they were inventing it, and they were patenting it, and most of them can't do algebra. And they'll start out as little tiny shops, and then they build more and more stuff. Grandparents come up to me all the time. They find out they're on the autism spectrum. A lot of them have had good jobs. I want to emphasize, people that might have an autistic kid, get them out doing things. They've got to learn how to work. That needs to start at a young age. But for an adult, a diagnosis really helps on their relationships. That's where it's helpful. The thing I want to ask you, where would some of the top innovators in the world be if they were born today? I don't think they'd be as successful. What would happen to Michelangelo? Great artist. He was a grubby little 12-year-old who dropped out of school, but he'd grown up with stone cutting tools, so he got exposed to that, and then he was running around all these churches looking at great art. So that's the exposure. Then he started making things, and then he was apprenticed into a studio. So you start out with exposure to the career, and then mentoring. And I had some very, very wonderful people that mentored me, such as my science teacher. Steve Jobs, bullied in school. Einstein, no speech until age 3. Musically inclined. When he couldn't figure out a math problem, he'd play his violin. And that would help him figure out some of his mathematics. A Nobel Prize winner was 50% more likely to have an arts and crafts hobby compared to other scientists. That is why we need to be keeping all of the hands-on things and art things and things like that in the schools. This is an actual study. Okay, tips for working with people that are different. Let's not put them on a crazy busy takeout window. I have a really bad working memory. So if you're going to have me run the espresso machine, let me just make a checklist, a written checklist of the steps that I have to do to run the espresso machine. Very, very simple little accommodations. And then the other thing, socially, I criticized some welding on a job, and I said, like kids do. And the plant engineer didn't just say, well, you're rude to colleagues. He made me apologize. He said, why do the welders up in the cafeteria right now, and you're going to apologize for that rude talk? What's the ultimate goal of education? Where's a student 10 years after high school? Everyone thought I was going to be totally not successful. I wasn't going to amount to anything. And I was doing some of my first big projects when I'm 10 years after high school. I want to thank my science teacher for getting me interested in studying. I was a student who was not studying, didn't care about studying, until studying became a pathway to becoming a scientist. Okay, grades and things like English, that was just goofing off. Algebra, I still can't do it. I was doing some of my first big projects. And one of the things I learned is when you're weird, you want to sell your work rather than selling yourself. No, I'm serious about that. Sell the work rather than myself. And I would show people my drawings. And I love the fact the HBO movie Temple Grandin replicated my projects and showed my drawings. It also showed how I think in pictures. That's accurate. So I would show off my drawings. And this is the drawing right here I sent to the Cargill Corporation back in the late 80s. And I designed the front end of every Cargill beef plant in North America. I think that's doing pretty good for somebody who thought was stupid, and somebody that can't do algebra. This is all steel and concrete work. Yep. And one of the things that motivated me, I wanted to prove to the world that I was not stupid and I could actually do things. Another thing I did is I saw doors to opportunity. A lot of kids today don't see doors to opportunity, because I had to go in the back door on a lot of things. And there's a scene in that movie where I go up to the editor of our State Farm magazine and I get his card. I had the guts to go up and get the card. I can tell you, selling candy for charity when I was little, that helped me do something like go up and get that card and start writing for that magazine. Now, being a woman in the 70s was a much bigger barrier than autism ever was. But women were a bit more accepted in journalism. So that's the drawing I sent to Cargill. And you might wonder, why is it curved? Because as the cattle come on around the bend, they think they're going back to where they came from. They have a natural tendency to go back to where they come from. And that is actually one of my projects. And that was one of the pictures that I sent to Cargill. I just sent it in the mail, the head of Cargill. And I got the first job in the late, like about 1989. Go out there and get things. And I love the fact that the movie replicated all of my projects. This is a working replica of the dip vat system. I really, really liked that. And that had a nice brochure. Had to be black and white back in those days because color printing was too expensive. And that was a project I did in 1983. And again, curved. And I think that's going to be the end of my talk right now. I actually got done just a little bit ahead of the clock. And then we're going to have the great discussion coming up now. And so we'll go on to the next one.
Woo!
Can everyone hear me okay? Can you hear me, Dr. Marroquin?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine.
That's great. Well, it's just been an absolute pleasure to spend time with you this afternoon, talking about Mary Sully's work, listening to your ideas about visual thinking. We even developed a hand signal for each other when we think one of us is going on too long.
So, Gloria, I guess you got done a little tiny bit before the clock timed down, but I was watching the clock the whole time.
I appreciate you and your dedication and diligence to watching the clock and time. It's always something that we have to be thinking about as we're having these types of conversations.
Well, I did a talk for the FFA. I couldn't believe it. There was 30,000 people in that stadium, and the timer didn't work. And I mean, I was supposed to be 20 minutes. I was 2 minutes over. That was really intimidating. I remember looking over the top of the great big screen, and the nosebleed seats were full in the stadium. And fortunately, I asked for a regular podium, and I just looked at the people in the front row, and I go, hotel meeting room. Had to.
It has just been such a joy to have you here. You're one of my heroes as a fellow visual thinker. But I know there's lots of people here tonight who also consider you their hero or star, because you've brought so much to the public eye about those of us who are visual thinkers, those of us who think differently.
Well, I'm very concerned about the skill loss, very concerned. And I show the same version of these slides to business people with a bit more engineering stuff in it. And some hydraulic systems and stuff, I took those out. But I'm very concerned. There's stuff that we don't build.
Yes, and I'd like to get back to that point later on in our conversation. I'd like to first talk about your book.
Okay.
So 2022, visual New York Times bestseller. How does it feel to have your work resonate with so many people?
Well, it really makes me happy, but also I want to get the word out, because I want to see these kids that think differently get out and be successful. And too many of them are getting addicted to video games in the basement. I'll tell you how to get them off of that, fixing cars. You know, I'm serious. And they end up going, oh, the car's motors are more interesting than the video games. But we also need these people.
So in the book, you describe very specifically two types of visual thinkers, object-focused and spatially focused. Are there people who demonstrate both?
Yes, there can be pictures of mixtures. But what you tend to get in autism is an extreme object visualizer, or an algebraicist about possibly, or an extreme mathematician. But then the people that are mixtures, and I think Mary Sully is a mixture, because she does some very representational art, but she's also doing, you know, the abstract. The middle panel is looking the bird's eye view, and then the other third panel is really much more abstract. And I'm not a mathematician. I would love to have a mathematician go over that art, because my first reaction, I looked her up on Google, Mary Sully artist, and I saw the first 3 panels that came up, and I go, okay, traditional art for your culture and mathematics, because the ones that came up first, the top panel was not as representational.
I love when we walked through the gallery earlier today, you pointed that out to me, that the panel starts, or the triptychs start representationally, then they're broken down mathematically, and then they become even more abstract. And I'd like to talk about that a little further.
Well, the thing is, I'm not a mathematician, but I know a lot of your cultural patterns are their patterns. And I'd like to learn more about the mathematics behind that, because I'm not a mathematician. And I think she must be a mixture.
You dedicate an entire chapter to genius and neurodiversity in your book. And in it you share examples of the crossroads between neurodiversity, genius, and visual thinking, including the story of Thomas Edison, who had over 1,000 patents. And I wonder if you want to share a little bit about Thomas Edison.
Thomas Edison was a high school dropout, and he learned how to work at an early age. This is really important. He was selling newspapers at age 11. And then I read about some other biographies of silver miners out west, and they were selling newspapers at a young age. So you're learning how to sell and to work. And then he had a mentor. There was a mentor that taught him how to operate the telegraph and how to fix telegraph equipment. So mentoring is important.
How did the stories of other visual thinkings like Michelangelo, Thomas Edison, other inventors help you navigate a world that is so focused on verbal thinking and culture?
I didn't realize until I was in my late 30s that other people didn't think in pictures. And the way I figured it out was kind of unique. If I ask most people, think about your own house or your own dog, you tend to see it. And I ask you about something you don't own, okay, a cell phone tower, except that didn't exist when I first started asking these questions. But let's say a church steeple. They're out there in the environment, and you ask a visual thinker like me, they'll start naming off where they're at. I asked a speech therapist one time at a meeting about a church steeple, and she got 2 lines like this. And then I also talked about aphantasia. There's almost no visual thinking. But I was shocked that she couldn't make a clear image of that. And then people that are kind of in the middle will go New England type and then put some detail on it. But it's still not a specific one. Where I tend to have very specific ones. Even on cell phone towers, the different types of fake trees. And I know where they're located in my town. The useless cell phone antennas on our equine building that don't work when you're inside the building.
So we're going to look at some of Mary Sully's work together,
Okay.
which we looked at together in the gallery and discussed in terms of her format, but also the way that she breaks down her subject matter. So talking about this work, Eugene Field, which focuses on the children's author of Winkin', Blinkin' and Nod, we're looking at the top panel where there's children portrayed in silhouette with bells ringing, and then that's broken down to an aerial perspective with the tops of the children's heads and the bells. And then you come to a Native American baby in a cradle board out in a field. What were some of the thoughts you had when we walked through the gallery together?
Well, this one's kind of different than the others because usually the bottom panel is the super abstract version. Now, I didn't realize that that was a top view. I saw bells on there, but I didn't realize those were the tops of the children's heads. See, then when I kind of got the pattern looking at a bunch of the pictures, realized that that middle one is usually a top view, usually. This one's kind of unique because usually the bottom panel is not real realistic like that.
Here's another one we talked about earlier, the tapping shoes of Fred Astaire. What are some thoughts on this one?
Well, if Fred Astaire's name had been on there, I wouldn't have thought that those are shoes. Okay, when I first saw that, I thought binoculars. But then when you pointed out that those were shoes, then I can see how the flowers there had shoes in them. And also I kind of hear the tapping of the tap shoes.
So for you, the imagery invoked sound.
Well, I start out, my memory is visually indexed. So I'm going to get the picture first, then I can get sound.
And you also had an interest in film and literature. What were some of your favorite
I love
films?
science fiction.
Yeah.
I love the Space Odyssey. That's very relevant. I'll tell you right now, Hal better have an off switch. Yeah, we had some misunderstandings, Hal. James disconnected him.
I understand you like other types of westerns and other science fiction shows that are portrayed actually in
Well,
the
some
film.
of my favorite shows when I was really young were shows like Lassie, I liked animal shows. So Lassie, I really liked the Mickey Mouse Club. Then, of course, I'm old enough now to watch the Howdy Doody show.
Yeah. I remember the Howdy Doody show.
Yep.
Any other thoughts about Fred Astaire?
Well, I'm now kind of remembering some of the movies, but now I'm seeing what she did there with the shoes. The other thing that interests me is I get science and nature, and there's all these mathematical articles in there about the different materials, maybe the structure of a chemical, something that's in the cells in the body, and they're gorgeous geometrical patterns. They're inside our body. This is where AI is going to shine. Drug discovery, materials discovery, beautiful geometric patterns. I'd like to turn the math kids loose on that magazine.
Yeah. Okay, and here's another one. This one is about Alice in Wonderland, and we talked about these types of pouches that Lakota and Dakota girls would wear on their belts, and they're beaded, and then Mary Sully abstracts the turtle in the top part of the panel, creates a pattern from it, and then is more representational at the bottom. And one of the things we talked about was that she often worked with pairs of items. And I mentioned that she had a very close relationship with her sister Ella. And you and I have shared about those types of connections with people.
Well, that was really important for her because Ella, when she was with Ella, she got out and she did things. And I can see where you had the pair that be Mary and her sister. I can see that. Now, I had a hard time figuring out what Alice in Wonderland had to do with this. I didn't realize it. I don't remember a turtle being in that, but maybe there was.
A character called the Mock Turtle.
Okay. I just remember the caterpillar and that song about the white rabbit. Following rabbits to different places.
Did you have any close connections with people that helped you, just as Mary Sully did with
Well,
her
I
sister?
did. I can, of course, my mother taught me to read when I was age 8, and I got very good at early education. I had great elementary teachers, but one of my most important teachers was Mr. Carlock, my science teacher. And I was a bored student who didn't care about studying. And he gave me interesting projects because I'd gotten fascinated with optical illusions, with an Ames distorted room illusion. And they showed in the HBO movie the actual film clip from that, and he goes, well, you gotta figure out how to make this. They wanted me to figure it out myself. And so I originally thought I'd become a psychologist working on visual perception, because that fascinated me. But that helped me in my cattle work, because the first thing I did was to get into chutes and see what the cattle were seeing. And nobody else had noticed these little reflections. I can see these reflections on the water. Well, those could change with the time of day, and the cattle were afraid of that.
I want to ask you some questions about your book.
Okay.
You dedicate your book to people who think differently, which I found very touching. I found it very moving as someone who does think visually but also thinks differently. You're now in an audience of over 1,000 people. What do you want to say live to people who think differently?
I want to develop their skills and have them get out where they can do things. My kind of mind, we have a huge need for fixing things. I'm really concerned about that. You know, visual thinking, they'll use, some educators say, well, stupid kids take a shot. Well, they're not stupid kids. It's a different way of thinking and problem solving. You just see it. I'll give you a real simple example. A lady at the Denver airport was angry because the airlines had lost her stroller for this double stroller for 2 little kids. And I immediately saw her kids in a Southwest Airlines blue wheelchair. Not the other wheelchairs, because the kids would fall out of those. It had to be a Southwest Airlines blue wheelchair. And I just saw the 2 kids in that. They knew they would fit in it and they wouldn't fall out. Okay, so she could use that for a stroller. See, that's just a simple example of seeing a solution to a problem.
Making that visual connection.
Yeah, and I just saw it. It just comes up almost like a PowerPoint slide.
You and I have talked a lot about our love of animals. We've shared about our horseback riding experiences together. And I know you just returned, or you just came to New York from a farm show in Pennsylvania. Right. So as a visual thinker, what were some of the things you noted that were striking to you as a visual thinker at the farm show?
Well, there were some good things I really liked seeing there about crop rotation. I've done a paper on grazing. Grazing cattle, sheep, and goats is an important part of the sustainable agricultural future. We're having all these fires now, and one of the ways to help prevent that is grazing. Because the middle middle of the country, that land started out with bison grazing it. You gotta graze that land or you're gonna get woody shrubs that just burn up. And you can improve soil if you do it right. I was very pleased to see that this kind of sustainable agriculture was being promoted at the Pennsylvania Farm Show. I thought that was wonderful.
You also saw, I understand, a large sculpture, a butter
The
sculpture.
butter cow. And they had a video that showed that she's not a solid butter. There's a skeleton, armature, and the butter's put on about this thick over it. And they showed off her secret in the video that was attached to the exhibit.
That's a whole nother form of art, butter.
Oh no,
butter's
because they
no
still
different.
have to make it look really realistic. They have to make the features of the cow look very realistic, and they did.
My final question for you is, if Mary Sully were to create a personality print of you, what would she include?
Well, I think it needs to have cattle and horses on it, but also doors. You see, being a visual thinker, when I saw opportunity, I visualized it as a door. You know, there were different doors to opportunity. Because in order to have a memory, I don't really have abstract thinking. So I might have something with cattle and horse silhouettes and doors, and I'm thinking of ways I could make it more abstract. That's what I think would be good.
It is such an honor to have you here at the Met. It's just such a pleasure.
You know what,
to
we
meet
got
you.
some more time left here.
I know.
We're not supposed to take questions off the audience, but maybe we might take one right off the front here. We have 14 minutes.
I know, we're finishing early.
We're finishing early, no?
Yeah, we didn't even have to use our hand signal.
Yeah, but yeah, I also see the timer up there, and it's got some time on it. It's got 14 minutes on it. And anyway, we're supposed to go for the full hour. One of the things I would like to learn more about Mary Sully is I don't know anything about her math ability. We know that she can fix cars, keep cars running. You see, that's the visual thinking side. How good she was math, we don't know.
Right.
And that's something I would really like to learn more about, but we may not be able to.
Well, one of the things we talked about was after you read about Mary Sully, you mentioned after reading about her story and the drawings under the bed, but also her tendency to isolate socially. You asked me, you said, you know, I'm really thinking that she possibly was autistic. Now we're not doctors and we can't make that diagnosis, but I wondered what were some of the clues or cues that you thought?
Well, one of the cues is being really reclusive. And that's a problem with quite a lot of people with autism, want to be recluses in their room. That was something I was not allowed to do that. When I went to a special school, I got kicked out of a regular school for throwing a book at a girl who called me a retard. And I wanted to stay in my room, and they made me go to meals. I had to go to chapel. And when I didn't want to go to movie night because I was too nervous, they said you have a choice. You can be in the audience or run the projector. So I ran the projector. But she very likely could be autistic. There's a lot of adults now finding out they're autistic when the kids get diagnosed. Helps them a lot with their relationships. Autism is a continuous trait. When does slightly nerdy become autistic? Then on the mathematics side, look at all the people out in Silicon Valley. Yeah, they're probably on the spectrum. It's a brain can be more thinking, or a brain become more social emotional. And one thing that's helped me, and this is in my old book, Thinking in Pictures, is I'm on antidepressant medication. I've been on it for 45 years. Best thing that ever happened to me. See, there was something wrong in the nervous system where my engine was like racing. Let's go back to the old-fashioned cars. Imagine in neutral and you're flooring the accelerator. The carburetor screw needs to be adjusted. And I went on the medication. Within a week later, my colitis, a lot of that cleared up. But there's just something wrong in the nervous system where it's ramped up to be in a constant state of fear over absolutely nothing.
It's true, yes.
And I think there's a good chance she was on the spectrum. Because when I look at the detail of that work, now I know she had to use inexpensive materials that she could just buy in the 5 and dime store, but very, very meticulous. I was able to look really closely at the panels, and I think they figured out what she used. There's one panel that has got round black dots, and I know what she used to draw those. She took the cap off an old-fashioned fountain pen and put it down like this and drew around it. That would have made that exact same size circle.
Very resourceful and creative in that
Using
way.
just things that she had in the house, and she obviously used a ruler on some of that.
I want to talk about your interest in animals, visual thinking and animals a little bit more. We still have some time.
Yeah, we have time. Let's use it.
We both have a love of animals. We both have experience living on farms, growing up on farms, working on farms. And I just wondered if you could just maybe touch on a few points of how visual thinking has helped you or encouraged you in your work in animals, or how animals have helped you.
Well, the first thing, my main exposure to horses and cattle was as a teenager. Came from the background, so that brings up the important thing of exposure. But an animal lives in a sensory-based world. I tell the vet students, you've got to get away from verbal language. What is the dog seeing? Now, a dog's world is smell. And Cornell University did some brain scans on dogs and found out there's a gigantic internet trunk line that goes from the olfactory centers in the brain back to the visual cortex. And I'm going, smell pictures? Whoa. That's trippy. You know, I can probably imagine, but it's a world of sensory. The octopus lives in a world of sensory. There's a book called An Immense World, and it's looking at animals from a sensory-based standpoint. The octopus is all a touch-based world. It's sensory, not verbal. And being a visual thinker, the first thing I did is look at what cattle were seeing. And horses just basically saved my life as a teenager. It was one of the few places I was not bullied. I was in 4-H riding program. I showed horses out in open horse shows and things like the trail class. And this was a place where I had friends who shared interests. That's really important. It's lucky that Mary had her sister, or she wouldn't have gotten out and done anything.
Yes, I think it's the social awkwardness that many of us visual thinkers struggle with. And I think it's helpful to have a mentor or someone to give you guidance and social guidance.
Well, I think what I'm seeing is a lot of grandparents come up to me, and these grandparents have decent jobs, like pharmacist, accountant, computer scientist, really good jobs, but they have relationship issues. And when they get diagnosed, it helps on them. But they learned how to work at an early age. Also, in our older generation, social skills were taught in a much more structured way. I was taught to say please and thank you. And when I forgot to say it, Mother would say, you didn't shake hands with that person, or you didn't say please or thank you. I had the guts to go up and get the editor's card, just like it was shown in the movie. That scene is real. And that was very important getting my career started, because writing for that magazine really helped establish my credibility. I was a livestock editor for 7 years. And I worked very hard to be really good at that. And when I summarized that cattle feeders meeting, it was summarized accurately. And people respected me for that.
There's just so much rich information and helpful information in your book. I've read it multiple times, sections of it multiple times. And each time I read it, I find something else that really speaks to me.
What were some of the things that you found out that spoke to you the most? We still have time. We have less than 7 minutes left.
I think the social interaction was one of them, and the points about relationships, connecting with people, and also I'm a very strong visual thinker. I can see an exhibition even before it's even created. I can see it in my mind.
Like how you would put the pictures on the wall, for example.
Yes. And then my husband and I often go walking because we have a farm out in the country. And he always says, you have such great vision. You can see things from so far away. I'm myopic. I'm very nearsighted. But what I look for are patterns. When I see something that's off.
That's why I go to mathematics, because I tend to see things that shouldn't be there. Like if I'm going down the highway and there's an electronic billboard, all these ones where they have photographs and stuff on, there's 2 pixels off on that billboard, I'll see it.
Yeah.
Wow. There's something that shouldn't be there.
Right. And that's how I see when we're taking our country walks. I'll be seeing that, look at the trees, and suddenly I'll notice a shadow or something, something, and it'll be a hawk or an eagle.
Well, you see, and animals notice that because, like, let's say you're a little mouse, that hawk might eat you.
That's right. So it's very visual for me, in that way, and that's how I observe the world. I'm also someone who struggles with email messages. I'm not very verbal. And that's one of my challenges, is that when I look at so many emails, I get visually overwhelmed. And we now live in a very verbal world.
Well, this is just it, and the education system has gotten so verbal, and they're adamant about the algebra stuff. And I think the reason for that is the more mathematical mind thinks more in patterns than algebraically. And they don't understand, in my kind of mind, that's not how I think. And I think it's a big problem, because we're screening out, we have a huge problem now in factories on maintenance, huge problem. Like, I have center track restrainer systems out in all the big meatpacking plants. They put that stuff in 30 years ago. Well, it's breaking down now, they have to be replaced. And the shops have all retired out. So the one shop that's left is gouging 4 times the price. That just happened a year and a half ago. That's a serious problem, because the little shops aren't forming. It turned into the big shops, because those kids are playing video games in the basement on autism diagnosis, because they never took a shop class. And I look at that big skinny building, I just look at that today, and I'm going, I don't want to be in there if the water pumps don't work and the power's off. It's not going to be fun. And the people that live in that building don't even think about those mechanical systems. I'm going, you're going to have some good mechanical systems for something that tall.
So coming to New York City, I know you came from Pennsylvania, I know you travel all over the world, but what's it like for you as such a strong visual thinker to be in such a busy place as New York City?
Well, I would probably rather live somewhere else. The thing that blows my mind, I went and I gave a talk, I don't think we'll leave out the name of the company, but a very financially oriented company, in a very nice hotel they owned, and I asked them, how many of you have been in the basement of this building and know how any of the things work? They were all financial people. They had never been in the basement of the building. They didn't realize that the harbor water, that comes up 2 foot, the basement of that building would be flooded and nothing's going to work. That had never even crossed their minds. I'm in this fancy, like, $1 jillion a night room looking out the window, and I'm going, to that water down there. Storm surge, they're going to be in trouble here. I would not want to be in that hotel when that happens.
Well, we are getting closer to the end of our time.
Well, should we be naughty and take one question right off? The audience, just one right here. Just come up to me and tell me your question, and I'll repeat it.
How smart do you think animals can get?
Well, certain things are very smart. Let's look at bird migration. You know, that's something where animals are extremely smart. A memory. There's certain birds that can hide their nuts all around in different places, like maybe in a few hundred different locations. And that bird can remember where all those nuts are. See, that's something very specific. That's something that animals are smart about. And they're also very social. We got to get our dogs out socializing with other dogs. Solve a lot of behavior problems.
Well, I do want to end with your concepts of visual thinking. I think the title is so important. The gifts of people who think in pictures, patterns, and abstractions, like Mary Sully. So I do want to end
Well, I think it's really important. And the thing is, we need all of the different kinds of minds. And for the college-educated engineer, it's going the math route. But then I look at the things the visual thinkers do. You see, you need to have both. There are different kinds of thinking. I do have a chapter in there on disasters, and one of the disasters I talked about was Fukushima. And I just couldn't believe the mistake they made. When you live next to the sea, it's not a very good idea to have no waterproof doors to protect your electrical emergency cooling pump in the basement, a pump you really need. And if they'd had waterproof doors, it would not have happened. See, the problem is the mathematicians didn't see it. I didn't see the water coming over that. It took me 30 minutes on Google to look at the historical data and to look at the 10 meters going to be breached. and it was. They did a great job of making it earthquake-proof, but 20 minutes later, the tsunami drowned it. They needed a visual thinker to go, hey, you better put waterproof doors on that thing. And they did not have them. It would have saved it.
So there's an element of imagination.
Well, yeah, I just can see it. Now, in order to be able to see that, I have to know what water flowing over things looks like. So I have to pull things out of memory. But I can see the water. I'll tell you another big problem they're going to have. That seawall is going to hold the water on the site. I might have 20 feet of water on that site, guaranteed to break the doors and flood the basement.
If you were to meet, so now we do need to end on Mary Sully.
All right. We have 20 seconds left.
I just want to say, if you were to meet Mary Sully today, and if she were sitting here, what might you say to Mary Sully?
Well, I think her art's super interesting. I want to learn more about her in math. That's the thing that really interests me. How good was she in math? I'd also like to have mathematicians come in and look at those pictures. That's another thing I would like. That just fascinates me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Grandin. It's been an absolute pleasure.